Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks to the university for this invitation. Thank all of you for coming. Thanks to China Minqing Bank, which played a crucial role in making this tour possible. So thank you all. It's a little difficult coming to China to talk. People might be expecting some wisdom about the Chinese economy. No doubt someone has some wisdom of that sort to offer, but I do not. I am not an expert on China. I will say China is a particularly difficult economy to comprehend, and I don't pretend to have that kind of information. I can, however, I think, say some useful things about China's relationship with the world, not just the United States, but obviously the United States as an important part of it. And in this talk, I'm going to try to look a little bit past the immediate crisis, talk about three issues that will become, I believe, increasingly crucial as we look towards the years ahead. Just to preview, one issue is the issue of China's trade surpluses and how they fit into the global economic problems and pattern. The second is the issue of China's trade composition and the difficulties that must be overcome to maintain an open marketplace. And the third is the role of China in the world as a whole, placing growing pressure upon resources and the environment. And I'll talk about all three of those, but I think I need, as a starting point, to talk at least a little bit about the nature of the situation in which we find ourselves. This is not a happy world economy, let us say. It has been a very difficult period. Some people say I predicted it. Actually, no, I did not. I predicted a problem. The extent of the crisis has caught me as much by surprise as everyone else. I knew that there was a major housing bubble and that it would be a recession when the housing bubble burst. But the extent to which this has become a true crisis of the entire financial system, a crisis of the entire world economy, is not something that I think almost anyone really saw coming. One thing that in particular is truly remarkable in a bad way and is crucial to the way in which this crisis is affecting China is the extent to which the global crisis has decimated world trade. And so my favorite picture to simply illustrate the extent to which we are in unprecedented territory is this chart. The chart shows the annual rate of growth of the volume of world trade. And as you can see, world trade fluctuates with the business cycle. There was a drop in world trade, particularly in the late 1990s, associated with the Asian financial crisis. But nothing has happened in the period since the 1930s to match the catastrophic collapse of world trade that has happened in the most recent period. We've seen an extraordinary drop in the volume of trade, volume of imports, volume of exports of each country. This reflects the depth of the economic crisis. It reflects the financial crisis, which has caused major problems for trade credit. All in all, this is a kind of barometer of the crisis. Say a word about the origins of the crisis. When we started to have trouble, it was widely viewed as a very narrow problem. Subprime mortgages in the United States. Then it became clear that there was a more widely based problem with the bursting of the U.S. housing bubble. Then it became clear that with falling home prices, we were seeing defaults on many mortgages, not just subprime. Then it became clear that there were housing bubbles in the rest of the world as well, and that the bursting of the Spanish housing bubble the British housing bubble, the Irish housing bubble, were also causing problems. Then it became clear that the financial system was far more vulnerable than anyone had thought, that many of the complex securities created out of housing had been held in the financial system, causing a series of major losses and crippling the mechanism of credit. Then it became clear that there were major unsustainable capital flows in the world economy, that Eastern Europe had had a period of booming inflows of capital, followed by an abrupt collapse of those inflows that was very similar to what had happened in Southeast Asia in 1997 and 1998. It's now clear, I think, that we had a much broader weakness, much broader vulnerability in the world economy than anyone, including pessimists like myself, had really understood before the crisis. The world had taken on too much leverage, too much debt in many places, households, families, countries, financial institutions. I don't mean this talk to be too retrospective, but I guess we can say that a combination of financial deregulation and a long period without severe economic stress bred complacency. We began to think that all of the rules that we had learned from hard experience in the 1930s no longer applied, that you could trust the system to be self-correcting, that risk had been adequately handled, that nothing really bad could happen. And when you begin to believe that nothing really bad can happen, you start to create the preconditions for something really bad to actually happen. And that's what happened in this crisis. The extent has been extremely severe. The response of policymakers has been much better than it was 75 years ago. When we had the Great Depression, there was no comprehension of what was happening, whereas this time at least we had some understanding of the crisis, partly because we had seen something like it before. As a result, there have been proactive policies. Interest rates were cut quickly. Monetary authorities, especially the Federal Reserve, moved to broaden their activities to try to sustain the flow of credit. Governments in general did not do what governments did in the 1930s. They did not cut spending and raise taxes in the face of recession. So they did not act to deepen the recession, at least. And in some cases, notably the United States and China, governments have actually moved actively to try to sustain demand. And as a result of all these measures, we probably are not going to have a repeat of the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's a sentence I never thought I would be saying. Probably not going to have another Great Depression. To the fact that to even reach the point where it's possible that we might have another Great Depression tells you just how bad things are. But I think we look as if we are avoiding the worst. If you look at this picture, you see that little jog up at the very end. It's not straight down. That's not a lot to base hope on, but if you do, a number of measures are showing something like that right now. Many measures are suggesting not that the world economy is recovering. In fact, they're not even suggesting that the downturn is over, but they are suggesting that the free fall, that cliff, has come to an end. So perhaps we will stabilize at least, not have Great Depression 2. I'm feeling more hopeful, or less, I guess I should say not hopeful, I'm feeling less terrified than I was 2 months ago. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we are a very long way from seeing any sign of recovery. If you look at how do recessions end, basically how does a slump normally end in any major economy, the answer is in practice they almost always end because interest rates are reduced. Money becomes easier. People begin spending more. And in this recession, the major economies all have reduced interest rates dramatically. So you would say, well, won't the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of China, the Bank of Japan, the Reserve Bank of China, won't all of these authorities just keep reducing interest rates until they've done enough to produce recovery? But of course, the problem is